In 1987, 12-year-old Emma Chen disappeared from her bedroom in the middle of the night. No broken windows, no signs of struggle, just an empty bed and a music box that shouldn't have been there. Over the next 5 years, 11 more children would vanish from the small town of Millbrook under eerily similar circumstances. Then the disappearances stopped as suddenly as they'd begun. For 30 years, the cases remained unsolved, becoming local legend whispered about in coffee shops and school hallways. But when renovations begin on the old Chen house in 2023, workers discover something that was never supposed to be found, a hidden room that holds the key to one of the most disturbing crimes in the town's history. The sledgehammer hit the wall with a dull thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Marcus Webb wiped sweat from his forehead and stepped back, studying the crack that had appeared in what should have been solid drywall. After 15 years in construction, he'd developed an instinct for reading buildings, sensing when their bones and structure weren't quite right. "That's not right," he muttered, running his calloused fingers along the fissure. The Chen house had been empty for over a decade, its rooms gathering dust and memories in equal measure. The new owners, a tech couple from Portland with more money than sense, had hired Marcus's crew to gut the place completely. Open floor plan, modern appliances, the whole gentrification treatment that was slowly transforming Millbrook from a working-class town into something unrecognizable. But houses built in the 1960s had their quirks, and this one seemed determined to keep its secrets intact. Marcus tapped the wall again, listening carefully to the hollow sound that resonated back. Definitely empty space behind there. "Hey, Joe," he called to his partner, who was methodically ripping up carpet in the hallway. "Come check this out. This wall sounds all wrong." Joe ambled over, his tool belt jangling with each step. At 52, he'd seen every kind of construction anomaly imaginable: forgotten rooms, hidden passages, even a Prohibition-era speakeasy they'd found in a basement renovation last year. Wrong how? Like there's space behind it, but according to these blueprints. Marcus gestured to the architectural plans spread across a sawhorse in the corner. This should be the exterior wall. They studied the plans together. The bedroom they were standing in, Emma Chen's old room, according to the realtor who'd handed them the keys with a nervous smile and a brief history lesson they hadn't asked for, was marked as a simple rectangle. No mention of any storage space, architectural anomaly, or structural irregularity. Maybe they added insulation later, Joe suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. Could be a gap for utilities or something. But Marcus was already reaching for his stud finder, the electronic device that had served him faithfully through countless renovations. The familiar beeping filled the quiet room as he ran it across the surface, but instead of the steady pattern that would indicate wooden studs behind the drywall, it beeped erratically, registering empty space for nearly 4 feet of wall. "That's not insulation," Marcus said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "That's a room. A whole damn room." Joe stepped closer, his weathered face creasing with concern. In all his years of construction, he'd learned to trust Marcus's instincts. The younger man had an almost supernatural ability to read buildings, to sense when something wasn't quite right about their fundamental structure. "You think someone deliberately walled off part of the house?" Only one way to find out. Marcus hefted the sledgehammer again, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. But something made him hesitate. Maybe the way the afternoon light slanted through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Or maybe just the sense that some discoveries were better left unmade. But curiosity won out, as it always did. The first swing of the sledgehammer sent plaster cascading to the floor in white chunks that stirred up clouds of dust. The second swing revealed darkness beyond, a void that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. By the third swing, Marcus had opened a hole large enough to shine his flashlight into the hidden space. What he saw made him step back so quickly he nearly tripped over his own toolbox. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "What? What is it?" Joe peered over his shoulder, trying to see into the opening. Marcus aimed the flashlight beam back into the hole, his hand trembling slightly. The light revealed a cramped room, maybe 3 feet wide and 6 feet long, like an oversized closet. But it wasn't empty. Far from it. Crude wooden shelves lined both walls, and on those shelves sat exactly 12 music boxes, arranged with obsessive precision. Each was different. Some looked like expensive antiques with intricate mechanisms. Others appeared to be simple gift shop purchases. But they all shared one disturbing characteristic. They were positioned with mathematical exactness, each one paired with a folded piece of paper like some kind of twisted filing system. Photographs in small frames were scattered among the music boxes, showing children's faces. All around the same age, maybe 8 to 12 years old, all smiling with the forced brightness that suggested school picture day. But what made Marcus's skin crawl was how well-maintained everything appeared. Despite being sealed behind a wall for decades, there was no dust, no signs of neglect. At the far end of the cramped space sat a child's dress on a small wooden chair, blue with white flowers, the kind of dress a little girl might wear to church. It hung there as if someone had just taken it off, waiting for its owner to return. "Well, that's not on any blueprint I've ever seen," Joe said quietly. Marcus played the flashlight beam across the shelves again, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Some of the photographs showed a young Asian girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Emma Chen, he realized with growing unease. Others showed different children. A boy with freckles, a girl with blonde braids, another boy with serious dark eyes. But they were all captured in that same artificial brightness of school portraits. "We need to call someone," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "The owners?" "No." Marcus looked at the dress hanging in the shadows, and a chill ran down his spine. "The police." 2 hours later, Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to the original owners, despite the shared surname that would later prove to be an uncomfortable coincidence, stood in Emma Chen's old bedroom, studying the hidden room that shouldn't have existed. She'd been with the Millbrook Police Department for 8 years, long enough to develop good instincts about which cases would haunt her sleep and which would fade into routine paperwork. This one, she knew immediately, was going to be the haunting kind. The opening in the wall had been carefully widened by the crime scene team to allow easier access, but the room beyond remained exactly as Marcus had found it. Sarah had called in photographers who were now documenting every angle with methodical precision, their camera flashes illuminating corners that hadn't seen light in decades. "Any idea how long this has been sealed up?" she asked Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the county coroner who'd arrived with her own team of specialists. Dr. Hoffman examined the plaster and drywall that had concealed the room, running her fingers along the edges where new material met old. "Based on the materials and construction technique, I'd say this was sealed sometime in the early to mid-1990s. The work is amateur, not professional construction. Whoever did this was in a hurry and wasn't particularly skilled." Sarah nodded, though her attention was focused on the contents of the room. She'd pulled on latex gloves and was carefully examining one of the folded notes next to a music box shaped like a carousel. The paper was yellowed with age, but the handwriting was still legible. "Emma loves this song. She hums it when she brushes her teeth. The little horses remind her of the pony ride at the county fair." Sarah's throat tightened as she read. The level of detail was unsettling, intimate observations that could only have come from someone who'd watched Emma Chen very closely. She opened another note. "Katie brings her lunchbox to school every day. Peanut butter and jelly cut into triangles. She saves the crust for the birds." Someone was watching these kids, Sarah said to Dr. Hoffman, taking detailed notes about their daily routines, their preferences. She counted the music boxes methodically. 12 total. Pulling out her phone, she scrolled through the department's cold case files, specifically the missing children reports from the late 1980s and early 1990s that every officer in Millbrook knew by heart. Emma Chen, 1987. Disappeared from her bedroom. Katie Sullivan, 1989. Last seen walking home from school. Michael Torres, 1990. Vanished during a family camping trip. Jennifer Walsh, 1991. Missing after a sleepover. The list continued through 1992, 12 children total over a 5-year period. Then the disappearances had stopped as abruptly as they'd begun. This corresponds to every missing child case from that period, Sarah realized. All 12 of them. The crime scene team worked through the night, carefully removing each music box and note for analysis. Despite their age, all 12 music boxes were in perfect working condition, mechanisms oiled and adjusted, no rust or deterioration. Someone had been maintaining them even after the room was sealed. This level of preservation doesn't happen by accident, Dr. Hoffman observed. Someone's been caring for these items recently. Sarah's phone rang just as dawn was breaking. Marcus Webb again. Detective, you need to get back out here. We found another room, in the basement this time. An hour later, Sarah stood in the Chen house basement, watching her team use pneumatic hammers to break through a section of concrete wall that thermal imaging had revealed to be hollow. The work here was even more obviously amateur. Rough concrete patching, uneven surfaces that any professional contractor would have been embarrassed by. When they finally broke through, the space beyond was larger than the upstairs room, but showed the same hasty construction. This basement space contained children's furniture arranged in a rough circle, 12 small wooden chairs, each paired with a music box identical to those found upstairs. But what disturbed Sarah most was the evidence of multiple participants. Tool marks in the concrete suggested at least 2 different people had worked on the construction. Scattered personal items, a man's wristwatch, reading glasses, a woman's scarf, indicated that several adults had spent time in this space. This wasn't one person working alone, she told Dr. Hoffman. There was a group involved. In the center of the room sat a larger chair, adult-sized, next to a small table. On the table was a journal, its pages filled with multiple handwriting styles, different people documenting their activities over time. Sarah opened the journal carefully, noting immediately that unlike the neat cursive of the upstairs notes, this showed at least 3 distinct handwriting styles. The first entry was dated September 15th, 1987. H convinced us we're saving them from a corrupt world. Says childhood innocence must be preserved. But looking at Emma crying in the corner, I have serious doubts about this whole plan. These are real children with real families who love them. M. The response in different handwriting. M doesn't understand the bigger picture yet. The world is poisoning these young minds with violence and materialism. We're offering them something pure, something better. They'll understand eventually. H, a third voice, joined the conversation. I agreed to help because H said we were starting a kind of alternative school, a place where children could learn away from societal pressures. But this feels more like imprisonment than education. -R. The entries revealed a small group, identified only by initials H, M, and R, who had somehow convinced themselves they were rescuing children from a corrupted society. But cracks in their alliance appeared quickly. Week 3 with Emma. She won't stop crying, keeps asking for her mother. H says she'll adjust with time, but it's been 3 weeks now. This feels fundamentally wrong. M. We're not qualified for this. Katie is getting sick, and we don't know how to help her. R says we should get medical attention, but H refuses, says we can't risk exposure. What have we gotten ourselves into? MH is becoming obsessed with control. He talks about the children like they're possessions rather than human beings. I want out of this arrangement. M. The entries showed the group falling apart over the next few years. M disappeared last night, left a note saying he couldn't be part of this anymore, just packed his things and vanished. Now it's just H and me with 12 children we're completely unprepared to care for. -R. The younger ones are getting sick more frequently. We don't have medical training, don't know how to properly care for children this age. H insists we can't seek outside help. I'm starting to understand we're in over our heads. R, 3 of them have died now. Malnutrition, I think, combined with untreated infections. H sealed their bodies in the old root cellar, says we'll create a proper memorial later. I can't take this anymore. R, the final entry in H's handwriting alone. They're all gone now. One by one, they got sick, stopped eating, just faded away. R abandoned me last week, said she couldn't live with what we'd done. I've sealed their resting place, preserved their memory with the music boxes. Someday someone will understand we tried to save them. -H. The third hidden space was found behind a false wall in the basement's far corner. Unlike the other rooms, this one contained no furniture, no careful arrangements, just 12 small wooden boxes, crudely constructed and hastily arranged. Dr. Hoffman's forensic examination would later confirm that the remains inside matched the missing children from the cold case files. But the evidence told a story of neglect rather than deliberate murder, malnutrition, untreated medical conditions, the inevitable consequences of being cared for by well-meaning but completely unqualified adults. In Emma Chen's box, Sarah found a photograph. An elderly man with kind eyes standing next to a young girl who was unmistakably Emma. The inscription read, Grandpa Harold and Emma, Christmas 1986. But there were other photographs scattered throughout the space, showing Harold Chen with 2 other adults, a middle-aged woman, and a younger man, all 3 standing in front of what appeared to be the basement room during its construction phase. The investigation that followed revealed Harold Chen as the leader of the group, but far from its only member. Property records and financial documents uncovered 2 co-conspirators, Margaret Ross, a retired elementary school teacher who had disappeared without explanation in 1990, and Dr. Richard Miles, a child psychologist whose license had been revoked for unethical practices in 1989. Harold had been Emma's paternal grandfather, a widowed music teacher who'd become increasingly isolated and paranoid after his wife's death in 1985. He'd somehow convinced Ross and Miles that modern society was irreparably damaging children, that they needed to create a safe haven where selected children could be raised away from what he saw as corrupting influences. But their plan had been amateur from the start. None of them had real experience caring for multiple children. They'd had no medical training, no understanding of child psychology beyond their delusional theories, no long-term plan for what would happen as the children grew older. The children had died not from deliberate cruelty, but from the inevitable consequences of being cared for by delusional adults who'd vastly overestimated their capabilities. Poor sanitation, inadequate nutrition, untreated medical conditions, and the severe psychological trauma of separation from their families had taken their toll over the 5-year period. Police records showed that Margaret Ross had been found dead in a motel room in Nevada in 1991, apparently from suicide. Dr. Miles had never been located, presumably living under an assumed identity somewhere, carrying the guilt of his participation in the failed rescue mission. Harold Chen had died alone in the house in 1994, found 3 days later by a concerned neighbor. The death had been ruled natural causes, a heart attack brought on by stress and isolation. The Chen house was demolished 6 months later, its foundation filled with concrete and the lot converted into a small memorial park. 12 oak trees were planted, one for each victim, arranged in a circle around a simple granite monument bearing all their names. For the families, the discovery brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief. After decades of uncertainty, they finally had answers, though not the closure they'd hoped for. Learning that their children had died slowly from neglect rather than quickly from violence somehow made it worse, not better. Sarah kept the case files in her office as a reminder that evil didn't always announce itself with obvious malice. Sometimes the most dangerous people were those who committed terrible acts while genuinely believing they were doing good, who convinced themselves that their delusions were noble crusades rather than criminal conspiracies. The investigation also revealed why the disappearances had stopped after 1992. It wasn't because Harold had died or been caught, but because the community had finally started taking precautions. Parents began walking children to school, organized neighborhood watch programs, created the kind of protective network that made such crimes much more difficult to commit. In her final report, Sarah noted that the case served as a reminder that vigilance and community cooperation were often more powerful tools against predators than sophisticated forensic techniques or extensive police investigations. Years later, Sarah would still think about the music boxes, how they'd been maintained with such obsessive care even after their purpose had ended. Harold Chen had preserved them as monuments to what he'd believed was a noble cause, never understanding that he'd created a memorial to his own terrible failure of judgment. The case changed how Millbrook approached child safety, leading to improved coordination between schools, parents, and law enforcement. It also served as a cautionary tale about how isolation and delusion could transform apparently caring adults into unwitting killers. But perhaps, most importantly, it reminded everyone involved that the most effective protection for children wasn't found in technology or forensic science, but in strong communities where neighbors looked out for each other, where parents stayed involved in their children's lives, and where unusual behavior was noticed and reported rather than ignored. The 12 music boxes were eventually destroyed as evidence, but their melodies lived on in the memory of everyone who'd worked the case, a reminder that good intentions without wisdom, preparation, and genuine love could be just as deadly as outright evil.